Welcome to Soft Sleep Tales, a channel where timeless stories, gentle narration, and quiet atmospheres help you drift into rest. Before we begin tonight's tale, I'd love to know where you are listening from. Share it in the comments below. It's always wonderful to see our little community stretching across the world. If these stories bring you comfort, you're welcome to subscribe and join us on these quiet journeys. Now, it's time to get comfortable. Settle into your bed or your favorite chair. Close your eyes, take a slow, deep breath, and let the day melt away. Allow my voice to carry you softly into sleep, to a place where imagination flows and dreams begin. It is the winter of 1883, and in the market town of Helmsley, nestled in the North York moors between rolling hills and ancient stone walls, there stands a shop that has occupied the same corner of the market square for nearly 40 years. The sign above the door, painted in fading gold letters on dark green, reads, E. Thornhill and Daughter, Cartographers and Map Sellers. The windows, tall and many-paned in the Georgian style, display a careful arrangement of maps, some framed and mounted, others rolled and tied with ribbon, and still others spread open to show coastlines and mountain ranges rendered in delicate ink and watercolor. Inside, the shop possesses that particular quality of organized stillness that belongs to places devoted to learning and precision. The walls are lined floor to ceiling with shallow drawers, each labeled in a neat hand: British Isles, Continental Europe, Asia Minor, the Americas, celestial charts, historical maps. A long wooden counter divides the front of the shop from the work area behind, and on this counter sits a brass bell, a leather-bound appointments book, and a small wooden box containing visiting cards. But it is the back room, the workshop itself, that would capture the attention of anyone who truly understood the craft of cartography. Here, beneath two large skylights that flood the space with northern light during the day, stands a massive oak table, 10 feet long and 6 feet wide, its surface scarred and stained by decades of use. Around this table are arranged the tools of the trade, compasses and dividers of varying sizes, each one polished and precise, ruling pens and drawing pens with nibs of different widths, bottles of India ink in black and sepia, cakes of watercolor paint in the wooden boxes, brushes ranging from broad wash brushes to fine pointed detail brushes made from single hairs. There are magnifying glasses on articulated stands, protractors and set squares, burnishing tools and erasers made of fine rubber. There are reference books stacked on shelves, geographical surveys, travelers' accounts, astronomical tables, treatises on projection methods, and there are maps, everywhere maps, some finished and awaiting delivery, some in various stages of completion, and some very old indeed, historical documents that serve as references or inspiration. It is in this workshop, on a February evening as snow begins to fall softly beyond the skylights, that Ada Thornhill sits alone at the great oak table, her hands folded before her, her eyes fixed on the map that has occupied the center of the workspace for the past 6 months. Ada is 38 years old, neither young nor old, caught in that middle distance of life where the future no longer stretches endlessly ahead, but the past has not yet begun to weigh too heavily behind. She is tall for a woman of her time, with dark hair that she wears pinned in a simple arrangement, and grey eyes that have spent so many years focused on fine details. that they have developed a particular quality of intense concentration. Her hands are stained with ink around the fingernails, and there is a perpetual slight smudge of graphite on the side of her right hand where it rests against paper when she draws. She wears a simple dress of dark blue wool, practical and unadorned, with a white collar and cuffs that she launders herself every week. Over this, she has wrapped a grey shawl against the evening chill, for though there is a small iron stove in the corner of the workshop, she keeps it burning low to save coal, and the great room with its high ceiling and stone walls never quite achieves warmth, even on the mildest days. The map before her is large, nearly 3 feet by 4 feet, mounted on a drawing board that can be tilted to various angles. It shows the island of Iceland, that remote northern land of volcanoes and glaciers, rendered in the careful, elegant style that was her father's signature. The coastline is complete, traced in fine brown ink with small annotations marking fjords and headlands, bays and peninsulas. The major settlements are indicated with small circles and a careful lettering. The mountain ranges are shown through a technique called hatchuring, short parallel lines that indicate slopes and elevations, creating an illusion of three-dimensional terrain on the flat surface of the paper. But the map is not finished. Large portions of the interior remain blank, waiting for details that were never added. There are pencil marks indicating where rivers should flow, light sketches suggesting where glaciers should be painted in pale blue and white, annotations in her father's handwriting noting verify elevation or confirm position or check recent survey. This map was Edmund Thornhill's final project. He had worked on it for nearly 2 years, corresponding with explorers and scholars, consulting surveys and travel accounts, applying all the skill and knowledge accumulated over a lifetime of cartographic work. It was to be his masterpiece, the culmination of his career, a map that would finally do justice to that wild and mysterious island that so few people ever saw, but which fascinated all who studied it. And then, 6 months ago, on a bright morning in August, Edmund Thornhill had suffered an apoplexy while standing at this very table, had collapsed without warning, and had died 3 hours later without regaining consciousness, leaving his daughter alone in the world, and his final map forever incomplete. Ada has not touched the map since the day of the funeral. She has worked around it, completing smaller commissions that were already in progress, filling orders for standard maps from the stock her father had accumulated, maintaining the shop because she must maintain something, must have some purpose to rise each morning and dress and descend the stairs from her small flat above the shop. But the Iceland map remains as he left it, a monument to interrupted work, to plans unfulfilled, to the way death comes without regard for what we have left undone. Tonight, however, as the snow falls and the light fades and the shop settles into its evening quiet, Ada finds herself examining the map with a different quality of attention. She has received a letter today, forwarded from the Royal Geographical Society in London, and this letter has stirred something in her that has lain dormant these past 6 months, something that feels uncomfortably like obligation, or perhaps guilt, or perhaps something more complicated that has no simple name. The letter rests on the table beside the map, and Ada picks it up now, unfolding it carefully, though she has already read it 3 times since it arrived this morning. The paper is good quality, cream-colored and substantial, and the handwriting is clear and confident. the letters formed with a precision that speaks of education and care. It is dated January 15th, 1883, and it comes from Reykjavik, Iceland. Dear Mr. Thornhill, the letter begins. I hope this correspondence finds you well and that your work on the Icelandic map continues apace. It has been some months since I last heard from you, and I confess I have been eager to learn of your progress. As you may recall, I sent you in September the detailed notes from my expedition to the Vatnajökull region, including sketches and elevation measurements that I hoped would be useful for your rendering of that particularly challenging area. I write now partly to inquire whether those materials arrived safely and proved helpful, but also to share news of a discovery that may be of interest to your work. Last month, while examining historical records in the National Library here in Reykjavik, I came across a Danish survey from 1780 that includes remarkably detailed observations of the northwestern fjords, an area that I know has proven difficult to map accurately due to its remoteness and complex geography. I have taken the liberty of transcribing the relevant portions and am enclosing them with this letter. I believe they may provide valuable verification for your work and perhaps resolve some of the uncertainties that you mentioned in your last correspondence. I remain, as always, deeply grateful for your willingness to undertake this project. A comprehensive and accurate map of Iceland would be an invaluable resource for scholars, travelers, and for our own people here, who often find ourselves navigating by memory and local knowledge rather than reliable charts. Your reputation for precision and artistry gives me great confidence that this map, when completed, will stand as the definitive work on our island's geography for many years to come. I look forward to hearing from you at your convenience and remain your devoted correspondent in matters cartographic and otherwise. Yours faithfully, Sigrid Björnsdóttir, Assistant Curator, Natural History Collection, the National Museum of Iceland. Ada sets the letter down and closes her eyes briefly. Sigrid Björnsdóttir. The name is familiar, appearing in several letters she found among her father's papers after his death. A young woman, it seems, perhaps 30 years of age, who has made a name for herself in the small but growing community of Icelandic scholars and natural historians. A woman who, like Ada herself, has chosen to pursue work that most consider unsuitable for her sex, and who has apparently done so with enough skill and determination to earn a position of some responsibility. Ada had not answered the previous letters from Miss Björnsdóttir. She had not known how to form the words, how to explain that Edmund Thornhill was dead, that the map would remain forever unfinished, that all of Miss Björnsdóttir's careful observations and measurements and transcriptions had been offered in service of a project that would never be completed. But this letter, arriving today with its assumption of continued work, its generous offering of new information, its evident enthusiasm and hope, makes silence feel less like discretion and more like cowardice. Ada rises from her chair and moves to the small stove, adding a few lumps of coal and adjusting the damper to increase the draw. The fire brightens, sending warmth into the immediate vicinity, though the far corners of the workshop remain cold. She fills a kettle from the tap in the small sink that occupies one corner of the room and sets it on the stove to heat. While she waits, she lights the oil lamp that hangs above the work table and its steady flame pushes back the gathering darkness, creating a circle of warm light that transforms the workshop into something intimate and separate from the world beyond its walls. The tea, when it is ready, is strong and hot and faintly bitter. Ada drinks it from a plain white cup, standing at the window that looks out onto the market square. The snow is falling more heavily now, accumulating on the cobblestones, muffling the sounds of the town, transforming Helmsley into something soft and dreamlike. A few people hurry across the square, collar turned up, heading home to their suppers and their fires. The lamplighter makes his rounds, touching his taper to each street lamp, creating small halos of golden light in the gathering dusk. Ada watches all of this with a feeling she cannot quite name. It is not unhappiness exactly. Her life since her father's death has achieved a kind of equilibrium, a routine that requires nothing of her except consistency. She opens the shop each morning at 9. She tends to the occasional customer, mostly people wanting maps of the local area for rambling or property surveys. She maintains the inventory, dusts the shelves, keeps the accounts. She closes at 5, climbs the stairs to her flat, prepares a simple supper, reads for an hour or two, and sleeps. It is a small life, a quiet life, and there are moments when Ada feels grateful for its predictability, for the way each day resembles the one before, requiring no decisions of consequence, demanding no risks, promising no disappointments because it promises nothing at all. But there are other moments, like this one, when she feels the weight of all the things she has not done, all the maps she has not drawn, all the places she has never seen except as lines and colors on paper. Her father had traveled in his youth, had surveyed portions of Scotland and Wales, had even spent a season in the Alps making sketches and measurements. The maps he made were based on actual observation, on knowledge gained through experience rather than borrowed from others' accounts. Ada has never traveled further than York. Everything she knows about the world beyond Yorkshire, she knows secondhand, through books and maps and the stories her father told. She has drawn mountains she has never climbed, coastlines she has never walked, cities she has never entered. Her knowledge is precise but abstract, accurate but lifeless, like pressing flowers in a book and believing you have captured their beauty. She finishes her tea and rinses the cup and returns to the work table. The letter from Sigrid Björnsdóttir seems to watch her, waiting for a response that Ada does not know how to give. The proper thing, the professional thing, would be to write back immediately with the sad news of her father's death and an apology for the delay in informing Miss Björnsdóttir, to thank her for her contributions and explain that they will, unfortunately, not be needed, as the map will not be completed, to wish her well in her work and bid her farewell. But Ada finds she cannot quite bring herself to write such a letter, because to write it would be to acknowledge, finally and irrevocably, that her father's last work will remain unfinished, that his reputation, built over decades, will be marked by this single incompletion, that all the hours he spent, all the correspondence he maintained, all the hopes he had for creating something of lasting value will come to nothing. And perhaps more troubling still, to write such a letter would be to acknowledge that Ada herself, who spent 20 years as her father's assistant, learning every aspect of the craft, developing skills that few women and not all men possess, will never make full use of that knowledge. that she will remain always an assistant to a dead man, a keeper of his shop and his memory, but never a cartographer in her own right. Ada stands at the table, her hands resting lightly on its scarred surface, and makes a decision. Not a dramatic decision, not a life-altering commitment, but a small decision, the kind that can be made and unmade, attempted and abandoned without consequence. She will write back to Sigrid Björnsdóttir, but she will not yet, reveal her father's death. She will thank Miss Björnsdóttir for the new information. She will ask questions about the Danish survey, about the northwestern fjords, about Iceland itself. She will, for a little while longer, keep alive the fiction that Edmund Thornhill still works, still plans, still intends to complete his map. It is a deception, yes, but a small one, and it will buy Ada time to consider whether there might be another possibility, one she hardly dares to articulate even to herself. The possibility that she might finish the map herself. The thought, now that it has formed, seems both absurd and inevitable. Absurd because she has never completed a map of this scale and complexity on her own. Because she is a woman in a profession that barely tolerates women even as assistants. Because she has never even seen Iceland and cannot claim the authority of first-hand knowledge. And yet inevitable, because she has all the skills required, has watched her father work through every stage of the process countless times, has even completed significant portions of other maps under his supervision. She knows the techniques, understands the principles, can handle the tools with confidence, born of long practice. The real question is not whether she can finish the map, but whether she dares to try. Ada pulls out a sheet of writing paper from a drawer in the table, uncaps her fountain pen, and begins to write. Dear Miss Björnsdóttir, thank you for your recent letter and for the valuable information regarding the Danish survey. I am most interested to learn more about these observations of the northwestern fjords, as this area has indeed presented certain challenges in terms of verification and accuracy. I wonder if I might impose upon your expertise with several questions regarding the interior regions of Iceland, particularly the glacial areas. The elevation changes and the seasonal variations in glacial extent make these features particularly difficult to represent accurately, and any additional observations you might share would be most helpful. I find myself also curious about the practical aspects of travel in Iceland. For a visitor unfamiliar with the terrain and climate, what preparations would you recommend? What season would be most suitable for observation and survey work? Are there reliable guides available? And what level of physical fitness would such travel require? I apologize for the extended silence since our last correspondence. The work has proven more complex than initially anticipated, but I remain committed to seeing it through to completion. I look forward to your reply and remain grateful for your generous assistance. Yours sincerely, Ada Thornhill. She reads through the letter twice, checking for errors, then pauses before signing it. Ada Thornhill. Not E. Thornhill as her father would have signed. Not Miss A. Thornhill, which would immediately reveal her sex. Just Ada Thornhill, ambiguous enough to allow Miss Björnsdóttir to continue assuming she corresponds with Edmund if she wishes, but honest enough that Ada does not feel she has actually lied. It is a compromise, and like all compromises, it satisfies no one completely. But it will do for now. Ada folds the letter, addresses an envelope, and sets it aside to post in the morning. Then she turns her attention to the map itself, really looking at it for the first time in months. The work her father completed is, as always, exquisite. His line work is clean and confident, his lettering precise and elegant, his use of colour subtle and effective. The coastline seems to breathe, the mountains to rise from the page. It is clear, readable, beautiful, everything a good map should be, but it is incomplete. And incompleteness in cartography, as in life, renders everything that came before somehow provisional, unresolved, waiting. Ada reaches out and touches the paper gently, feeling its slight texture, the barely perceptible thickness where layers of ink and paint have been built up. She traces with one finger the outline of Vatnajökull, the massive glacier that dominates the southeast of the island, following the pencil marks her father made, the notations in his hand. Could she do this? Could she actually complete this map? The technical aspects she knows she can manage, but there is more to it than technique. There is judgment involved, decisions about what to include and what to omit, how to balance accuracy with clarity, how to represent three-dimensional reality on a two-dimensional surface. There is artistry, the ineffable quality that distinguishes a merely competent map from one that truly serves its purpose, that helps the viewer not just locate places but understand them, feel them, grasp their relationships to one another. Her father had that quality in his work. Ada has always assumed she does not, has never been given the opportunity to discover whether she might. Outside, the snow continues to fall. The market square is nearly empty now. The shops close, the residents of Helmsley settled into their evening routines. Ada should close up the workshop, should climb the stairs to her flat, should prepare her supper and continue her quiet, predictable existence. Instead, she pulls her chair closer to the table, adjusts the lamp to better illuminate the map, and begins to study it in earnest, not as a monument to her father's interrupted work, but as a problem to be solved, a challenge to be met, a journey to be undertaken even if that journey takes her no further than this familiar room with its familiar tools and its windows looking out onto snow-covered stone. The night deepens around her. The stove burns low. The lamp flame flickers occasionally in some draught she cannot identify. And Ada Thornhill, Cartographer's daughter, bends over the map of a country she has never seen and begins, tentatively, to imagine how she might complete what her father started, how she might add her own hand to his work, how she might transform this monument of incompletion into something whole and useful and true. The morning arrives grey and cold, the snow having stopped during the night, but leaving behind a transformed landscape, everything softened and simplified under its white covering. Ada wakes at her usual hour, 6 o'clock, and performs her morning ablutions with the mechanical efficiency of long habit. Her flat above the shop is small but adequate. A bedroom with a narrow bed and a wardrobe, a sitting room with a horsehair sofa and 2 chairs, a small kitchen with a coal range and a sink. The walls are papered in a pattern of faded flowers. The floorboards are bare except for 2 small rugs, and the windows look out over the market square and the rooftops of Helmsley beyond. She dresses in her usual fashion, a grey wool skirt and a white shirtwaist, a dark cardigan against the morning chill. She prepares a simple breakfast of porridge and tea, eats standing at the kitchen window, watching the town wake slowly under its blanket of snow. The baker's boy makes his rounds, leaving his tracks in the pristine white. The chimney sweeps begin their calls. A cart struggles through the square, its wheels cutting dark lines through the snow. By 8 o'clock, Ada has descended to the shop, has swept the front step clear of snow, has arranged the maps in the window just as they were yesterday and the day before, and all the days stretching back through months and years. She unlocks the door at 9 precisely, though no customers are waiting, and indeed, none arrive for the first hour. The morning passes in familiar tasks. She catalogues a collection of old county maps that a estate solicitor has sent for evaluation and potential purchase. She repairs a torn corner on a framed map of the Lake District that has hung in the shop window for months. She updates the accounts ledger, recording the few small sales from the previous week, calculating what she will need to order from the paper supplier in Leeds. But throughout all of this, her mind returns again and again to the Iceland map, to the letter from Sigrid Björnsdóttir, to the decision she made last night that seems both momentous and fragile in the cold light of morning. At noon, she closes the shop for her dinner hour, climbs back to her flat, and prepares a simple meal of bread and cheese and cold mutton left from yesterday's supper. She eats without tasting, her thoughts elsewhere. Then, instead of taking her usual half-hour of rest in the sitting room, she returns to the workshop and stands once more before the great map. In daylight, streaming through the skylights, the incompleteness is even more apparent. The blank spaces seem to accuse, to demand attention, to insist on resolution. Ada pulls out the portfolio where her father kept all his reference materials for this project and begins to sort through them systematically. There are letters from Sigrid Björnsdóttir, dozens of them, dating back nearly 2 years. There are published survey reports, geological studies, travelers' accounts. There are her father's own notes, written in his precise hand, raising questions, noting discrepancies between sources, planning approaches to particular challenges. There are sketches and diagrams, mathematical calculations, lists of coordinates. It is, Ada realizes, a comprehensive foundation. Her father had done years of preparatory work, had assembled resources that few cartographers would have access to, had built relationships with experts like Miss Björnsdóttir who could provide information unavailable in any published source. What he had not done, what his death had prevented, was the final synthesis, the transformation of all this raw material into the finished map. But the raw material itself is here, waiting. Ada spreads several of Sigrid's letters across the table and begins to read them properly, not as artifacts of her father's work, but as resources for her own. The letters reveal a correspondent who is knowledgeable, precise, and generous with information. Sigrid describes in careful detail the landscape she has studied, provides measurements and observations, sketches small maps to clarify her descriptions. Her enthusiasm for the project is evident in every line, her pride in Iceland palpable. One letter in particular catches Ada's attention. It is from May of last year and describes an expedition Sigrid made to the interior, to an area she calls the Highlands, a vast plateau of volcanic desert and glacial rivers. The landscape here defies easy description, Sigrid writes. It is like nothing else on Earth, or at least like nothing I have encountered in my reading about other lands. Imagine, if you will, a terrain that seems to belong more to the moon than to our green earth. Black sand and volcanic rock stretching to the horizon, broken only by patches of moss so bright green they hurt the eyes. Rivers that appear and disappear, flowing sometimes above ground, sometimes beneath it, changing course with the seasons and the glacial melt. The scale is overwhelming. One can walk for days and see no sign of human habitation. No tree, no shrub, nothing but rock and sand and sky. The silence is profound, broken only by wind and the occasional call of a bird. At night, the stars are so bright and numerous that they cast shadows, and in summer, there is no true darkness at all, only a strange twilight that lasts all night and makes it difficult to judge the passage of time. I tell you this not merely to paint a picture, though I confess I find it difficult not to wax poetic about this strange and beautiful land, but also because I believe it is important for a cartographer to understand not just the measurements and coordinates, but the character of the place being mapped. Iceland is not simply a collection of features to be plotted on paper. It is a living landscape, still being formed by volcanic and glacial forces, still changing, still wild and largely unknowable. Your map, when completed, will be a kind of translation, I think, a way of making comprehensible to others something that resists comprehension, a way of imposing order and meaning on something that exists primarily as chaos and majesty. Ada reads this passage 3 times, feeling something stir in her chest that might be excitement, or might be fear, or might be some combination of the two. Sigrid is right, of course. A map is a translation, an interpretation. It is not the place itself, but a representation of the place, and the cartographer's task is to make that representation as useful and truthful as possible, while acknowledging that complete truth is impossible, that some essential quality of the actual place will always escape the confines of paper and ink. This is what her father understood, what made his maps more than mere technical achievements. He had seen the places he mapped, had felt their character, had found ways to communicate that character through the careful selection of detail, the artful use of color and line, the subtle choices that distinguish inspired work from merely competent work. And Ada has never done this, has never seen the places she helps to map, has never felt their wind or walked their ground or stood beneath their sky. How can she complete a map of Iceland when she has never been to Iceland, has never experienced the volcanic deserts and glacial rivers and strange summer twilight that Sigrid describes? The answer, when it comes to her, is so obvious and so radical that she almost laughs aloud. She will have to go there. The thought is absurd. Ada Thornhill, who has never traveled more than 50 miles from her birthplace, who has no experience of foreign travel, who speaks no language but English, journeying alone to Iceland, one of the most remote and challenging destinations in the world. It cannot be done. It should not even be considered. It is impractical, improper, probably impossible. And yet she finds herself calculating costs, considering logistics, trying to determine whether such a journey could actually be managed. Her father left her the shop and its contents, a modest savings, the small flat above. She has no dependents, no obligations beyond the business, which brings in barely enough to sustain her current existence. If she closed the shop for a period of time, if she used the savings, if she traveled modestly, could she afford the journey? Could she find passage to Iceland? Could she survive there long enough to see what she needs to see to complete the map? And more fundamentally, does she dare? Ada sits down at her father's desk in the corner of the workshop and pulls out a fresh sheet of paper. She begins to make notes, not a commitment, but an exploration, a way of thinking through the possibility. Passage to Iceland. Inquire at shipping offices in Hull regarding seasonal sailings. Summer months most reliable. Cost. Accommodations. Sigrid mentioned in one letter that she works at the National Museum. Could she recommend lodgings? Would she be willing to assist a visitor? Duration. Minimum time needed to observe key features. 1 month? 2 months? Equipment. What instruments would be needed? Can I transport them? Should I purchase in Reykjavik? Language. Do Icelanders speak English? Should I learn some Icelandic phrases? Health and safety. What risks? What preparations? The list grows. Practical considerations multiplying, each question spawning 2 more. It is overwhelming. It is impossible. And yet, Ada finds that she cannot quite let go of the idea, cannot quite dismiss it as the fantasy it surely is. She thinks of Sigrid Björnsdóttir, who has made a career in natural history despite being a woman in a field dominated by men. She thinks of the female travelers she has read about, women like Isabella Bird and Mary Kingsley, who have journeyed to far more dangerous and exotic places than Iceland and returned to write books about their experiences. She thinks of her father, who would never have hesitated to go see a place if seeing it would improve his map. And she thinks of herself, of Ada Thornhill at 38, living a half-life in a quiet town, maintaining a shop that barely sustains her, possessing skills she never fully uses, having already lived more than half the years she is likely to be granted without ever having taken a single real risk or claimed a single real achievement as her own. The afternoon light is fading when Ada finally sets down her pen. She has not made a decision, not exactly, but she has taken a step, has allowed herself to consider a possibility that would have seemed unthinkable just yesterday. She folds the notes carefully and places them in the desk drawer. Then she returns to the map and stands looking at it for a long moment, seeing not what is there, but what might be, what could be, if she has the courage to try. Outside, the short winter day slides toward evening. The snow on the rooftops glows pink in the last light. Smoke rises from 100 chimneys, straight up in the still air. Someone is playing a piano in one of the houses across the square, the sound faint but clear in the cold. Ada lights the lamps, tends the stove, completes her closing routine. But tonight, these familiar tasks feel different somehow, charged with possibility, as though the room itself has changed, has become a place where new things might happen, where the future is not merely a continuation of the past, but something that remains to be written. She climbs the stairs to her flat as darkness falls completely, prepares her simple supper, sits at her window watching the lamplit square below. And for the first time in 6 months, she feels something that might be hope, or might be terror, or might be the strange exhilaration that comes when we stand at the edge of the known world and contemplate the step that will carry us beyond it into territory we have only imagined, where every map ends and the real journey begins. Winter loosens its grip slowly in Yorkshire, reluctant to yield to spring. The snow melts and returns, until finally, in late March, the days begin to lengthen noticeably, and the first green shoots appear in the cottage gardens around Helmsley. Ada watches this transformation from her windows marking the passage of time not just by the calendar, but by the changing light, the altered quality of the air, the gradual warming of the stones. Throughout these weeks, she continues her correspondence with Sigrid Björnsdóttir, and with each exchange of letters, the possibility that seemed so wild in February begins to take on substance and shape, begins to seem less like fantasy and more like something that might actually be done. Sigrid's response to Ada's questions about travel comes quickly, carried on a ship that makes the winter passage despite rough seas. The letter is long and detailed, filled with practical advice and genuine enthusiasm. Dear Miss Thornhill, for Ada has finally revealed her sex, has written a brief, honest letter explaining her father's death and her own determination to complete his work, and has been met with sympathy and immediate offers of assistance. I am deeply sorry for your loss, and yet I find myself thrilled, perhaps inappropriately so, at the prospect that you might continue your father's work. A woman cartographer. This is unusual even here in Iceland, where women have somewhat more freedom than I understand they possess in England, but it is not unheard of, and I see no reason why sex should prevent anyone from doing work they are qualified to do. As to your questions about traveling here, I will tell you honestly that Iceland is not an easy place for visitors. The weather is unpredictable, the terrain can be challenging, and facilities for travelers are limited outside Reykjavik. But it is also magnificently beautiful, endlessly fascinating, and I believe quite safe for a sensible person who takes proper precautions. The best time for travel is late May through August, when the weather is mildest and the roads, such as they are passable. I would strongly recommend planning your visit for June or July if possible. As for lodging, I would be honored to have you stay with me. I live with my aunt in a modest house near the museum, and we have a small guest room that is rarely used. My aunt speaks no English, but she is welcoming to visitors, and I assure you we would make you comfortable. Regarding your concern about language, many people in Reykjavik speak at least some English, particularly those involved in commerce and the professions. I will, of course, be available to translate when needed, and I believe you will find Icelanders generally patient with visitors who make an effort to communicate. For your surveying work, you will need good walking boots, waterproof clothing. Rain is frequent even in summer, and warm layers, as the temperature can change dramatically throughout the day. I can help you acquire or borrow any specialized equipment once you arrive. I must tell you, Miss Thornhill, that I am excited at the prospect of showing you my country. It is one thing to describe landscapes in letters, quite another to stand in the presence of the things themselves. And I believe that seeing Iceland will not only help you complete your father's map, but will change forever how you think about the relationship between place and representation, between the earth as it exists and the earth as we attempt to capture it on paper. If you decide to come, please write to me with your plans, and I will meet you when your ship arrives. We will make this work, I promise you. Your friend, Sigrid. Ada reads this letter so many times that she nearly memorizes it. Your friend, Sigrid. Not your correspondent, not your colleague, but your friend. The casualness of it, the assumption of connection, touches something in Ada that she has kept carefully protected for years. She has had no friends since her father's death. Indeed, she had few even before. her life having been so consumed by the work of the shop, by caring for her father in his later years when his health began to fail. There are people in Helmsley who know her, who greet her politely in the street, but no one she could truly call a friend, no one who knows her thoughts or shares her interests or would miss her if she left. The loneliness of this realization sits heavy in her chest, but it also clarifies something. She has nothing holding her here, really. No one whose life would be significantly disrupted by her absence. No pressing obligations that cannot be temporarily set aside. Ada begins to make actual plans. She visits a shipping agent in York and learns that several companies operate seasonal service between British ports and Reykjavik, primarily carrying cargo, but taking passengers as well. The journey takes approximately 4 days depending on weather and sea conditions. The cost is more than she had hoped but less than she had feared, and it includes meals aboard ship, though accommodations are basic. She writes to the landlord, who owns the building that houses the shop, and negotiates a reduction in rent for the months she will be closed, arguing that she is maintaining the property and will return to full operations in the autumn. He agrees, somewhat grudgingly, perhaps moved by sympathy for a woman alone trying to preserve her father's business. She arranges for a neighboring shopkeeper, a kindly woman who sells stationery and books, to check on the building weekly while Ada is away, to ensure no leaks develop, no windows are broken, no problems arise that would cause damage in her absence. She orders new drawing paper and watercolor paints, invests in a compact traveling case designed for artists in the field, purchases sturdy boots and a waterproof Macintosh. The expenditures frighten her. She is using money she cannot truly afford to spend on a venture that might produce nothing of value, but she forces herself to proceed, to commit, to burn her bridges so that retreat becomes difficult. And she studies. She reads everything she can find about Iceland, geological surveys, travel narratives, historical accounts. She pores over her father's notes and Sigrid's letters, making her own annotations, formulating questions, beginning to develop a sense of what she needs to observe and understand. In the evenings, after the shop is closed, Ada works on the map itself, though she does not yet add any permanent features. Instead, she makes careful tracings of her father's work, creates preliminary sketches exploring different approaches to representing particular features. She is teaching herself, she realizes, preparing herself, building confidence through practice. One evening in mid-April, as she works late by lamplight, there comes a knock at the shop door. This is unusual. The shop has been closed for hours, and Ada approaches cautiously, peering through the glass to see who stands outside. It is Mrs. Daventry, her neighbor from 2 doors down, a woman of perhaps 70 with white hair and bright, intelligent eyes. Ada knows her slightly, has sold her maps occasionally, has exchanged pleasantries in the street, but they have never had any extended conversation. Ada unlocks the door. "Mrs. Daventry, is something wrong?" "Not at all, my dear. I saw your light burning and wondered if you might have a few moments to speak with me. If I'm disturbing you, I can return another time." "No, please, come in." Ada steps aside, ushering the older woman into the shop. "Can I offer you tea?" "That would be lovely." Ada leads Mrs. Daventry through to the workshop, where the fire still burns in the stove, and the great Iceland map dominates the table. While the kettle heats, Mrs. Daventry examines the map with evident interest. "Your father's work?" she asks. "Yes, his final project. He died before completing it." "And you intend to finish it?" Ada pauses, surprised by the directness of the question and by Mrs. Daventry's assumption. Yes, I'm considering it. I may travel to Iceland this summer to make the necessary observations." Mrs. Daventry nods as though this is the most natural thing in the world. "Good. You should." "You think so?" "My dear Miss Thornhill, may I speak plainly?" "Please do." "I have watched you these past months, since your father passed. I have seen you maintaining this shop, keeping everything exactly as it was, living a half-life that honors his memory but denies your own future. I have wondered when you would wake up and realize that you are still alive, that you have skills and intelligence and years ahead of you, and that wasting them in service to the past is a sin against yourself and against the gifts you have been given." The words are harsh, but Mrs. Daventry's tone is kind, and Ada finds herself not offended but moved, feeling tears prick her eyes. "I'm frightened," she says quietly. "I've never done anything like this. Never traveled alone, never attempted a project of this significance on my own." "Of course you are frightened. Fear is the appropriate response to doing something genuinely difficult and risky. The question is whether you'll let the fear stop you or whether you'll proceed despite it." Ada pours the tea with shaking hands. "How did you know about my plans to travel?" Mrs. Daventry smiles. "I saw you going into the shipping agent's office in York last week. I was there, visiting my daughter. And I've noticed your lights burning late, seen you carrying packages that look suspiciously like equipment for field work. It wasn't difficult to deduce." They sit together at the work table, sipping tea while the spring evening darkens outside. And then Mrs. Daventry tells Ada her own story. She was born Margaret Wright, daughter of a country vicar, expected to make a respectable marriage and live a conventional life. But at 25, she had instead joined her uncle, a naturalist, on an expedition to Greece and the Ottoman Empire, serving as his assistant and illustrator. They had spent 2 years traveling, observing, collecting specimens. "It was the formative experience of my life," Mrs. Daventry says. "Everything I saw, everything I learned, everything I discovered about my own capabilities and resilience, all of it came from that journey. When I returned to England, I married Mr. Daventry, who was a good man and supported my continued work in natural history. We had a partnership, a real partnership. He died 10 years ago, and I miss him every day. But I have never regretted those 2 years of travel, those 2 years of stepping outside the narrow role prescribed for women of my class and time." "Did people criticize you?" Ada asks. "Oh, tremendously. I was considered quite scandalous. But you know what I learned? The people who criticize are rarely the people whose opinions actually matter. They are people protecting their own choices by attacking others who choose differently. The people who truly matter, the people of intelligence and generosity, they understand that there are many ways to live a good life, and that courage comes in many forms. When Mrs. Daventry finally departs, after extracting a promise that Ada will come to her with any questions about travel preparations, Ada returns to the workshop feeling as though something has shifted, as though permission has been granted by someone whose permission she didn't realize she was seeking. She stands before the Iceland map and allows herself fully and finally to commit to the journey. She will go. She will see the volcanic deserts and the glaciers and the strange summer light. She will complete her father's map, but she will also create something of her own, something that bears her name and her vision and her hard-won knowledge. The spring deepens. The days grow longer and warmer. Apple trees bloom in the cottage gardens, and lambs appear in the fields surrounding Helmsley. Ada continues her preparations, crossing items off her lists, acquiring what she needs, learning what she can. In early May, she receives a letter from Sigrid confirming dates. A ship called the Thyra sails from Hull on June 10th, arriving in Reykjavik approximately 4 days later. Sigrid will meet Ada at the harbour. Everything is arranged. Ada books her passage, pays the required fees, and receives her ticket. Seeing it in her hand, the actual physical evidence of her plans fills her with a terror so profound that she nearly cancels everything on the spot. But she doesn't cancel. She places the ticket carefully in her travelling case and continues her preparations. On her final Sunday before departure, Ada attends services at the parish church, something she has done only occasionally since her father's death. The vicar is a gentle man who had known her father and who speaks to her afterward, wishing her well on her journey, which the entire town seems somehow to know about, despite Ada having told very few people. Your father would be proud, the vicar says, and Ada nods, hoping it is true. That evening, Mrs. Daventry hosts a small supper for Ada, inviting a few of the town's more unconventional residents, a woman who runs her own bookshop, a retired school teacher who never married, a widow who manages her late husband's printing business. They are not close friends of Ada's. She has no close friends, but they are women who have carved out lives on their own terms, and their presence feels like a blessing, like a community she didn't know she belonged to, offering its quiet support. They give her small gifts, a travelling inkwell that won't spill, a journal with fine paper for notes and sketches, a compass small enough to fit in a pocket, and they tell her stories of their own small rebellions, their own moments of choosing an uncertain future over a safe present. Ada walks home through the late spring twilight, feeling less alone than she has felt in months, perhaps in years. The final days pass in a blur of last preparations. Ada closes the shop on June 8th, placing a sign in the window. Closed for survey work. Reopening September 1st. She cleans the flat meticulously, covers the furniture with sheets, empties the perishables from the kitchen. She makes a final inventory of the shop's contents for insurance purposes. She writes letters to her few remaining distant relatives, informing them of her plans. And on the morning of June 9th, she locks the door of Thornhill and Daughter for the last time before her journey, shoulders her travelling case and a small trunk, and walks to the coaching station where she will catch the coach to York, and from there the train to Hull. Mrs. Daventry is there to see her off, along with the bookshop woman and the school teacher. They embrace her, wish her well, make her promise to write, and then the coach is departing, carrying Ada out of Helmsley, past the familiar moors and stone walls, toward the coast and the ship, and the journey that will carry her further from home than she has ever imagined going. As the town disappears behind her and the coach rolls on through the morning toward York, Ada feels her fear beginning to transform into something else, something that rises in her chest like a bird taking flight. Not confidence, not yet, but possibility. The sense that she is finally, after 38 years, stepping into her own life, claiming her own story, becoming not Edmund Thornhill's daughter, but Ada Thornhill, cartographer, traveller, maker of maps and seeker of truths that can only be found by going to see for yourself what the world actually looks like beyond the pages of books and the neat lines of other people's charts. The journey to Hull takes most of the day, and by the time Ada finds her lodging house near the docks, she is exhausted, dusty, and having second thoughts about the entire enterprise. The inn is noisy and smells of fish and tar, and her room is barely large enough for the narrow bed and a washstand it contains. Through the thin walls, she can hear other guests, sailors mostly, talking and laughing and singing. She lies awake for hours, her mind racing, cataloguing all the things that could go wrong, all the reasons this journey is a terrible mistake. She is not an experienced traveller. She has no real authority to complete her father's map. She is a woman travelling alone to one of the most remote places in Europe. She speaks no Icelandic. She has spent most of her life savings on this venture, and if it fails, she will return to Helmsley with nothing to show for it but a confirmed reputation for eccentricity and poor judgment. But in the morning, when she wakes to the sound of gulls and the smell of salt air, something in her has settled. The fear remains, but it no longer seems like a reason to retreat. It seems instead like the price of admission, the cost of attempting anything worth doing. She dresses, eats a quick breakfast in the inn's dining room, and makes her way to the docks where the Thyra is moored, taking on cargo and making final preparations for departure. The ship is smaller than Ada had imagined, a cargo vessel with limited passenger accommodation, but it looks solid and seaworthy, and the captain, when she presents herself, is professionally courteous, showing her to her cabin, a tiny space below deck with a bunk and a small chest for belongings. We sail with the tide at noon, he tells her. Weather looks favourable. Should be a smooth crossing, God willing. Meals are served in the saloon at fixed hours. Please don't wander about the deck when the crew is working. If you need anything, ask the steward. Ada thanks him and returns to her cabin to arrange her belongings. There is a small porthole that lets in light and air, and through it she can see the dock and the activity of the port. Cargo is being loaded, ropes secured, final checks completed. Other passengers begin to arrive, mostly men, businessmen and clergy, and one or two who might be scholars. At noon precisely, the lines are cast off, and the Thyra begins to move, pulled by a small steam tug out of the harbour and into the open sea. Ada stands on deck despite the captain's warning, watching England recede behind her, watching the coastline become indistinct and then disappear entirely until there is nothing but water in all directions and the ship alone upon it, making its way north and west toward Iceland. The crossing is not smooth, despite the captain's prediction. The North Sea is choppy, and Ada spends much of the first day in her cabin, fighting seasickness, sipping water, trying to keep down the dry biscuits the steward brings her. But by the second day, her body has adjusted to the motion, and she ventures out onto the deck to watch the endless grey water, the wheeling seabirds, the changing patterns of clouds and light. She finds herself in conversation with one of the other passengers, a Scottish minister named Reverend MacLeod, who is traveling to Iceland to study medieval religious manuscripts. He is perhaps 60, with a kind face and a gentle manner, and he seems not at all surprised to encounter a woman traveling alone on such a journey. Iceland attracts a certain type of person, he tells her as they stand together at the rail, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of orange and pink. People who are looking for something, knowledge, inspiration, escape, test of their capabilities. It's a place that reveals things, I think, about the earth, certainly, but also about ourselves. What are you looking for? Ada asks. He considers this. Understanding, I suppose. These manuscripts I'm going to study, they represent a way of seeing the world that we've largely lost, a time when the boundary between the physical and the spiritual was more porous, when people experienced the divine not as an abstract concept, but as a living presence in the landscape itself. I want to understand how that felt, what it meant to them. And what are you looking for? He asks in return. Ada thinks about how to answer. Completion, she says finally. My father began something and left it unfinished when he died. I'm trying to finish it. But I think I'm also looking for proof that I can do something significant on my own, that I'm more than just an assistant to someone else's vision. The minister nods. That's a worthy quest, and a difficult one. Be patient with yourself, Miss Thornhill. We don't discover who we are in a single moment of revelation. We discover it slowly, through the accumulation of choices and actions and the small courages of daily life. On the third day, the weather turns rough. The wind rises, the sea grows wild, and the Thyra pitches and rolls alarmingly. Passengers are ordered to remain below, and Ada lies in her bunk, listening to the creak of timbers, the crash of waves against the hull, the shouts of sailors working above. She is not frightened exactly. The crew seems confident, and the ship feels solid. But she is acutely aware of her own smallness, her own fragility, alone in a tiny cabin, in a tiny ship on a vast and indifferent ocean. But the storm passes, as storms do, and the fourth morning dawns clear and cold, and there, appearing on the horizon like something conjured from imagination, is Iceland. Ada stands on deck as the ship approaches, watching the coastline take shape and substance. Mountains, massive and snow-covered, rising directly from the sea, black volcanic rock forming cliffs and headlands. No trees, no green fields, nothing soft or gentle, just raw geology, the bones of the earth exposed and unapologetic. It is like nothing she has ever seen, and it takes her breath away. The Thyra enters Reykjavik harbour in mid-afternoon, threading carefully between underwater rocks that the captain knows from long experience. The town itself is small, much smaller than Ada had expected, a collection of wooden and corrugated iron buildings scattered along the shore, with a few larger stone structures, churches and public buildings rising above the general level. But the setting is spectacular. Behind the town, mountains rise steeply, still snow-capped despite the approach of summer. The light has a peculiar clarity, sharp and clean, making every detail stand out with hyper-real precision. And the air, when Ada finally disembarks and stands on solid ground for the first time in 4 days, smells of seaweed and sulfur and something else, something mineral and ancient that she cannot name. The dock is busy with activity, cargo being unloaded, passengers collecting their luggage, locals meeting arrivals, and there, standing slightly apart from the crowd, is a young woman with fair hair and bright blue eyes, wearing a practical wool dress and sturdy boots, holding a small sign that reads simply, Thornhill. Ada approaches, her heart suddenly pounding. Miss Björnsdóttir? The woman's face breaks into a wide smile. Miss Thornhill, welcome to Iceland. She sets down the sign and embraces Ada warmly, startling her with the physical directness of the greeting. You made it. I'm so glad. How was the crossing? Rough at times, but I survived. Good. You'll need that resilience here. Come, let me help with your luggage. My aunt's house is just a short walk from here, and I am eager to get you settled so we can begin planning your work. As they walk through the small town, Sigrid points out landmarks, the museum where she works, the cathedral, the Parliament building, and Ada listens, trying to absorb it all, trying to reconcile the maps she has studied with this three-dimensional reality of buildings and streets and living people going about their business. Sigrid's aunt's house is modest but welcoming, a wooden structure painted white with a turf roof and small windows. The aunt herself, a woman of perhaps 50 with Sigrid's blue eyes and a warm smile, greets Ada with a stream of Icelandic that Sigrid translates as welcome honored guest. Please consider this your home for as long as you wish to stay. The guest room is small but clean and comfortable, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looks out toward the mountains. Ada unpacks her few belongings, washes the travel dust from her face and hands, and then joins Sigrid and her aunt for a simple meal of fish soup and dark bread and butter. After the meal, as the aunt clears the dishes, Sigrid and Ada sit together at the table, and Sigrid unfolds a map of Iceland, one of the standard published versions that Ada recognizes from her father's collection. Tell me what you need to see, Sigrid says. Tell me what observations you need to make to complete your father's map, and we will plan an itinerary. Ada pulls out her own notes, the list she has compiled of features that remain unverified or incomplete. Together, they bend over the map, two women planning a journey into one of the least explored regions of Europe. And Ada feels something loosening in her chest, some knot of tension and doubt beginning to unravel. She is here. She has actually done it. She has traveled to Iceland, has met Sigrid in person, has begun the work she came to do. The fear has not disappeared. The doubts remain. But beneath them, Ada feels the stirring of something else. Determination, curiosity, and the beginning of a joy she had almost forgotten was possible. The joy of pursuing work that matters to her, of using her skills and knowledge in service of something larger than mere survival, of stepping finally and fully into the life she was meant to live. Outside, the long northern twilight settles over Reykjavik, but true darkness will not come. It is nearly midsummer, and at this latitude, the sun barely sets, creating a strange, beautiful half-light that lasts all night, as though the world itself is suspended between day and night, between what was and what will be, holding its breath in anticipation of tomorrow. And Ada Thornhill, Cartographer's daughter, sits in a house in Iceland making plans and allows herself to believe that tomorrow might bring discoveries worth the journey, that the map taking shape in her mind might be something worthy not just of her father's legacy, but of her own aspirations, that she might yet become the person she was meant to be all along. Sleep comes gently tonight, dear listener. Let it carry you as the ship carried Ada across the sea. Let your breathing slow like waves settling after a storm. Rest now, knowing that journeys taken in courage, even when they frighten us, lead to places we need to go. The map of your own life is still being drawn, still awaiting the details only you can add. Close your eyes. Tomorrow waits with its discoveries. But tonight, there is only this: warmth, safety, and the soft approach of sleep. Good night.